Hey everyone, I'm Jake, and this is Money Mondays. So I've been looking at a lot of the information that's on the internet about credit scores and about how they're calculated, and I noticed that there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of misconceptions about what credit scores are and about how to improve one if yours isn't very good. So I wanted to make a video about credit scores and about how to fix yours if you don't have a good one. So let's start off with what a credit score is. It's just a measure of how good you are at using debt. The companies that measure credit scores do so to determine how good you are at paying back what you owe. So they check to make sure that you're not overdoing it, like you're borrowing way more than you can possibly pay back, and they want to make sure that you have a good history of paying back all of the debts that you've taken out in the past. So the main reason that people have credit scores is to measure the riskiness that lenders have if they were to lend to you. If you have a really high credit score, then you probably aren't very risky, and companies can lend you money without having to worry about whether or not you're going to pay them back. But if you have a low credit score, then you might be more of a risk for that lender to give you money. They're not sure whether or not you're going to pay it back because you either don't have a good history of paying back your debts or you have a history of not paying them back. So there are 3 credit reporting agencies. They're Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. So every time you have a debt account, whether that's a credit card, a mortgage, a car loan, or any other time where you're borrowing money, you're going to have a report sent to one of those 3 or all of the 3 credit companies. The company that offers you the debt is called the lender or sometimes the creditor, whereas you borrowing are the borrower or the debtor. So let's say you buy a diamond ring from a jeweler. Well, they might report to Experian that they're lending you $3,000 in order to buy this ring. Well, they're not actually giving you any money, they're just giving you the ring, and you're supposed to pay them back over time for that debt. Now, as time goes on, you're supposed to make the payments each month and pay back the debt. If you do that and there's never any problems, then the jeweler will just report to Experian that you paid off the debt and everything's fine, and then the contract's over. So how do those big 3 credit companies determine what your credit score is? Well, they don't tell us exactly what their formula is, but there are some things that we do know. So first of all, they use a big math formula to determine what your credit score is, and different things in your credit history will count towards your score at different amounts. So each of the 3 credit companies actually calculates credit scores a little bit differently than the others, and they do that to try to convince lenders that they're better at keeping track of credit scores and determining the riskiness of borrowers than the other companies. So basically they're fighting for position to convince lenders that their formula is better than the other ones. So you may have heard of something called a FICO score, and that's basically what we're talking about here. FICO stands for Fair Isaacs Corporation, and they're the company that basically started measuring credit risk for people. So those big 3 credit companies, they actually start with a FICO score and they adjust it slightly based on their own formulas. Now all 3 companies use a slightly different formula, but the basic outline is like this. So the first part is your payment history, and that makes up about 35% of your score. And this means that you're actually making all of your payments on time. If you're late on one of your payments, then that's going to hurt your score a little bit. And if you just flat out miss a payment and don't make any payment at all, it's going to hurt your score a lot. Also, if you miss a big payment, like a mortgage, that's going to hurt your score more than just missing a credit card payment. But they're both going to hurt your score if you miss either one of them. Any missed payments are going to hurt your score. So the second part is your credit utilization, and that makes up about 30% of your score. And utilization is how much of your credit are you using versus how much do you have available. And so if you have a credit card that has $10,000 available, but you're only using $1,000 of your balance, then you're using 10% of your available credit. And that looks fairly good on a credit score. If you're maxing out all of your credit cards, that's really going to hurt your score because then it's going to look like you desperately need money, and that's seen as more risky to lenders. The usual words of advice are to keep your utilization under 30% for the best score, but really the lower your utilization, the better. So if you keep your credit cards maxed out all the time, you're going to look like somebody who can't handle their debt. And companies aren't going to want to lend you more because they're worried that you already can't handle what you currently owe. It's one of those catch-22s where if you really need credit, you're probably not going to be able to get it. Now the next part is the length of your credit history, and that makes up about 15% of your score. So this is probably the hardest one to fix on your own. Your credit length only increases as time goes on, and you can't make time go any faster. If your problem is that you don't have a lot of credit history because you're young or you just didn't have any credit cards for a long time, then there's not much you can do other than trying to maintain a good credit score, but you can keep it from getting worse if you don't close old accounts. So if you pay off a big debt, say you pay off your credit card, don't close the card because leaving it open will maintain having all of that history on your credit report. If you do pay off your credit card, don't close the account, just stop using it, and then all of the history from that credit card will still be on your report. The fourth part is new credit, and that makes up about 10% of your score. Now this one's pretty straightforward. If you go out and you open a bunch of new credit cards, then on one hand, you're going to be lowering your length of credit history because all of those accounts will be brand new. But on the other hand, you're going to have a lot of new credit, and that's seen as risky too. Someone that opens a lot of new cards is seen as someone who's desperately trying to get money, and that's seen as risky from a lender's perspective because they don't want to lend to somebody who's got a lot of money trouble. So the best strategy is to not open a lot of credit cards unless you really need them or it makes financial sense. And the last part is credit mix, and this also makes up about 10% of your score. And what this is just a measure of how many different types of credit you have. So if you have a mortgage, you have student loans, you have credit cards, you have a personal loan, a car loan, that's a lot of different types of debt. And that actually looks better than if you had all of the same types of debt. So if you had even the same amount on all student loans or the same thing on all credit cards. You want to have different types of debts because then lenders can see that you're able to handle different kinds of debts. So now that you know the makeup of how credit scores are calculated, you can fix yours if you find that it's too low. So if you know that your score is low because you have a lot of missed payments, then your course of action should be to make sure you don't miss any more payments going forward. If your score is low because you don't have a lot of credit history, then you need to make sure that you leave your accounts open so that you can maintain that credit history that you currently do have. But how are you supposed to know what your credit score is? Well, there's actually a few companies that will help you to determine your credit score, but it's important to know that the big three credit agencies don't actually give out your score. So all these companies that offer to help you figure out your score, they're really just kind of guessing, but they're usually pretty close. So you can be pretty confident that what they're estimating is fairly accurate. So there's companies like Credit Sesame, Credit Karma, or just Credit.com that offer to give you your credit score if you sign up with them. Some companies do it for free and some offer a fee. So I'll put links to a few of them in the description. Some companies are better than others, so check them out to see which ones you like best. I personally use Credit.com, and I like the way that they lay out what you can do to improve your score, and they give you a target score over time. But that's just me. I haven't used any of the other companies, but I've heard good things about all of them. So besides a credit score, there's something called a credit report, and that's different from a score. So a credit report lists all the accounts that are under your name, and it's not a score. It's actually a list of all of the old accounts and new accounts and current accounts that are under your name. It's really important that you check your credit report regularly because if someone steals your identity and starts taking out a bunch of loans under your name, you might be able to find out by checking your credit report and seeing that there's a bunch of loans that you didn't take out under your name. So there's only one place to get your actual credit report from each of the big three credit agencies, and that's annualcreditreport.com. I'll put a link in the description. So your credit report comes from each of the big three credit companies. Basically, you just answer a few identifying questions, and you have access to any of the three reports from the credit agencies that you want. Now, there is a strategy involved here. You can get one free credit report from each of the big three credit agencies, and so you could get all three at the same time, and then wait a year and get all three again. Or what I like to do is wait 4 months and get one from each of the three, and alternate each of the three credit agencies, and every 4 months you get another one, and that cycles around for the whole year. You wouldn't want to get all three in 1 month because then anything could happen for the next year and you wouldn't know about it because you wouldn't be getting your credit report for an entire year. So most of the credit agencies have the same information, but sometimes there's a difference. Some lenders will only report to one credit company, and so maybe TransUnion would have information that Experian doesn't have. But sometimes lenders will report to all three, so all three companies will have all of your information. I had a client once who had a parking ticket that was on TransUnion's credit report, but it wasn't reported to Experian or Equifax. And so when we did all three credit reports cycling every 4 months, we didn't know about that parking ticket until we got to the TransUnion credit report. So we missed out on a few months where we could have been addressing that past due account. Also, Discover Card just started offering free FICO scores to anyone on their website. You don't even have to be a customer of Discover. So it sounds like a good idea. I've never personally used it, but I'll put a link in the description, so if you want to check it out for yourself, you're more than welcome to. So those are the basics of credit scores. If you need to improve your score, start by checking your credit report and seeing which of the 5 areas that you could work on. If you want to know more about credit scores or any other personal finance topics, you can check out our blog at arbogasadvisors.com, or you can check out more of our YouTube videos at youtube.com/arbogasadvisors. Thanks for watching. Financial literacy topics. In fact, very few schools in the US do. Americans on average have a very difficult time with financial literacy and personal finance topics.
Isaac Newton,
And even
and
for
he had a
those people
quote
who want to learn
in 1720 where he said, "I can calculate the motion